Good day, boys and girls. Today is, or this video is the second of three videos on the fourth chapter in your textbook, which is referred to as organization and regulation. Now, we'll start today by looking again at the hierarchy slide that we've been looking at since we began the course. And in the last video, we talked about the level of tissues. Today, we're going to actually move a little bit further on and talk about the level of organs and organ systems. Okay, so an organ is a group of tissues of different types. So you can have connective and muscle and epithelial and whatnot, all functioning together to form a specific task. An organ system is a system of several organs working together in order to form to perform a specific task. Now, the first system that we're going to talk about today is the integumentary system, and this is otherwise known as your skin. Now, many people don't think about the skin as actually being an organ, but it's composed of multiple different tissues and serves several very major purposes. Now, the system itself includes the skin itself, but it also includes the skin as an organ, but it also includes things like hair and nails on your fingers and toes, and glands like sweat glands and oil glands and that sort of thing. The major function of the integumentary system is to protect the body. It protects you in several ways. It protects you from physical trauma to some degree, a little bit, right? You can touch your skin and it keeps things inside the body safer. It protects from the invasion by pathogens, viruses, bacteria, and other sorts of disease-causing things out there can't get through the barrier that the skin provides. And it also provides a protection against water loss. All right, if you didn't have skin, then the fat layer and the muscles beneath that would all dry up very, very quickly. And that would be very bad and very painful. They say that flaying, the removal of the skin as a punishment, and this is from medieval times, was an exceptionally painful punishment. Your skin helps to regulate the body temperature. We've mentioned this before. When you're very, very warm, the capillaries just underneath the outer layer of your skin dilate. They open up and they bring the hot blood to the surface, which releases that heat into the environment. And of course, when you're cold, those same capillaries constrict, and that keeps the hot blood in your core. Your sensory receptors, nerves, are embedded in your skin, and therefore we detect many aspects of our environment through our skin. And finally, the skin does have the ability to synthesize certain chemicals. Vitamin D is synthesized by the skin, and melanin, which is a protein that causes a pigment to come in the skin, and that's what gives you anywhere from very pale skin to very dark skin, depending upon how much melanin is actually being produced. Okay. Now, the skin is composed of two different layers. The outermost layer, and the layer that we really think of as the skin, is called the epidermis. And whoops, that was not the right thing to do. The epidermis is shown here. It's this top layer, and you can see it all in here. It's very thin. It's the outermost layer of the skin, and it is composed of epithelium. Okay, specifically, it is squamous, stratified squamous epithelium. All right, many layers of squished cells. Now, interestingly enough, the cells on the very outermost layers of your skin are dead, believe it or not. And when they die, As they die, they become filled with a protein called keratin, which is a waxy protein that actually prevents dehydration. It's waterproof. Um, Interestingly enough, other things are made of keratin as well. Hair is made of keratin, fish scales, alligator scales, reptiles, birds' feathers, horses' hooves. All right, all of those things are made of keratin. So it's a very widespread protein in the animal kingdom. Uh, Melanocytes are cells embedded in the epidermis that produce the protein melanin, which gives your skin its color. And it also provides some protection from UV light, ultraviolet light. Now, interestingly enough, the everyone, no matter what your ancestry is, has the same number of melanocytes in their skin. However, very pale people, people, for example, of Northern European ancestry, produce very little melanin, whereas people from whose ancestry is from areas closer to the equator produce a great deal of melanin, and that's why they have darker skin. All right. Other than that, there's no difference between the palest person on Earth and the darkest person on Earth, at least in terms of their skin. All right. I don't want to get into the socio-political, economic nonsense, but biologically, no difference. All right. Your skin is your skin is your skin, no matter where in the world you come from. Now, the second layer of the skin is the dermis. All right. And the dermis is a much thicker layer, and you can see it here. Actually, I went a little too far. It ends right about there. This is a thick inner layer of the skin, and this is where all of the action is. Now, this layer of the skin is not made of epithelial tissue, but rather connective tissue, specifically dense fibrous connective tissue. And so there's a lot of protein in there. There's a matrix that holds everything together, and so on. The protein fibers in that matrix are elastic and collagen fibers, and so that's what gives your skin its flexibility, right? You know, your great aunt Muriel comes along and pinches your cheeks, and they don't stay that way. It's not like Play-Doh, all right? They bounce back into shape, and that's because of the elastic and collagen fibers. Now, the most important thing about the dermis is that, first of all, it's the living portion of the skin. Remember, the epidermis is made up of half dead and dying cells. The living part of your skin is this dermis layer. And if you look at it very carefully, you can see there's all sorts of things going on in here. All right, there's blood vessels. There's the red represents arteries. The blue represents veins. By the way, arteries are not red and veins are not blue. We just color them that way so that you can distinguish between them. The yellow fibers that you see here and here, those are nerve fibers. So this is where the sensory stuff takes place. And there are nerve endings, for example, here and here. All right, and these are sensory receptors that sense things like heat and pressure and that sort of thing. But this is the living actual part of the cell. Now down here, crying out loud, down here, this represents a gland, an oil gland specifically. And this thing right here is a hair growing out of a hair follicle, which is located here. Notice this muscle, this teeny weeny little muscle here, all right? This is what's called an erector pili muscle, which causes your hair to stand up, all right? We'll get a little bit more on that later on. Now, as we go through the course, every once in a while, I'm going to talk briefly about things that can go wrong with each organ or organ system. And so what I'm going to talk about here is skin cancer. Skin cancer is a very dangerous type of cancer because it's one of the few that we can actually do a great deal to prevent. Now, there are many different kinds of skin cancer, but the two major types that arise in the epidermis are what we call basal cell carcinoma, which is the most common yet least deadly form of skin cancer. And there's an image of it right here. And it actually takes place in the epidermis. And it's the most common form of skin cancer, and yet the least deadly form of skin cancer. It's easily treatable. Typically, they surgically remove the lesion or whatever it is. Melanoma, on the other hand, is much less common, but much more deadly. And you have to be very careful with this, because the difference is that melanoma can actually but make its way down into the dermis, the living portion of the skin. And once it reaches blood vessels, it can metastasize, which means that it can spread throughout the entire body. And that's the danger of a cancer like melanoma, is that it spreads to other organs. Now, what can you do to prevent skin cancer? Stay out of the sun in the middle of the day. Wear protective clothing, tight weaved clothing, sunglasses, a wide-brimmed hat. Use sunscreen with an SPF of at least 15 that protects from both UVA and UVB light. My kids are all very, very pale. And so, every time they go outside, I slather them with SPF 50 because they're just so pale, and their skin doesn't have the protection of the melanin against UVA and UVB lights. Now, by the way, it does not matter if you are fair-skinned or dark-skinned, although fair-skinned people are more susceptible to skin cancer. Dark-skinned people can get skin cancer as well, and they can get sunburned and everything else. So you have to be careful. Last but not least, don't use tanning beds. All right, I know lots of high schoolers especially are very fond of getting that base tan for the prom and all of these other big events. All right, but to lie down wearing an outfit that contains less cotton than you find in the top of an aspirin bottle, putting yourself into a coffin-shaped box, and then turning on a radioactive light is just stupid. All right, don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. Anyway, enough on that. But so next thing, what are the accessory organs of the skin, and why are they important? Well, the accessory organs include things like your fingernails, hair, and glands, like sweat glands and oil glands. Your nails are derived from the epidermis, believe it or not from the living portion, but from the dying and dead portion. And they offer a protective covering for the tips of your fingers. Now, our fingernails in the great apes are much different than a dog's claws or a cat's claws, all right? Because if you look at the nails on a cat, they grow out of the end of the finger. Our nails grow out of the top of the finger. If you look at your finger, all right, the epidermis is this very top layer. And so it's quite different. And what that allows us to do is to slide things, all right? Have you ever watched your dog try to get a piece of paper off a table? All right, they can't do it because their nails don't provide the friction that can move that. You, on the other hand, can place your hand flat on that piece of paper and slide it right out. Ta-da! Anyway, your hair follicles are derived from the dermis, as you saw, but they do grow from epidermal cells. So your hair is actually epidermis or epidermal cells. Two major kinds of glands that you find in your skin are the oil glands and the sweat glands. Oil glands are associated with your hair, and they produce a product called sebum, or oil, that lubricates your hair and your skin. And the major function of this oil is actually to retard bacterial growth and to keep bacteria from growing on your skin. Now, we as humans, and hopefully hygienic humans, are constantly washing our hands and our hair and everything else. We take a shower every day and use shampoo and soap and everything else, and we're literally washing that bacteria away, but we're also washing away the oil that helps to protect us, all right, which may or may not be a good or bad thing. I'm not telling you not to wash, by the way. You should please wash, if not for anybody else, but for society's sake. Sweat glands are derived in the dermis, and their job is to help regulate body temperature. All right. When you get too warm, your sweat glands activate and they release fluid, a salty water-based substance called sweat, onto the surface of your skin. And when that sweat evaporates, it cools your body off. Evaporation is a cooling process. Now, the last slide in this video is the one on body cavities, and we kind of put it here because it's not no other real good place to put it. But I'm going to use these terms throughout the course, so I want you to be aware. There are two major categories of cavities in the body. You got the ventral cavity and the dorsal cavity. The ventral is along your front, the dorsal is along your back. Now, the dorsal cavity includes the cranial cavity. Can you guess what fits in there? Obviously, your brain. And then the rest of it is the vertebral cavity, which runs all the way down here. And in there, you find your spinal cord. On the ventral side, it's broken into three major components. Up here, you have the thoracic cavity. Whoopsie daisy. Here you have the abdominal cavity, and then finally down on the bottom, you have the pelvic cavity. There's a better diagram of that in the front, or from a picture from the front. Now, the thoracic cavity contains the heart and the lungs, and the esophagus passes right through it. It's just the esophagus is a long tube that carries your food from your mouth down into your stomach. But the thoracic cavity mainly contains your heart and lungs. Below that, you have the abdominal cavity, and most of the organs in the abdominal cavity are digestive in nature, although there's a couple of other things in there. Kidneys and liver and some other things. But the small intestine, the large intestine, the stomach, and that sort of thing are all found in the abdominal cavity. And finally, in the very bottom, you have the pelvic cavity, which contains your reproductive organs for the most part, as well as your urinary bladder. Okay, so that's the body cavities, and that is the end of the second of 3 videos on Chapter 4, Organization and Regulation. Okay, and I hope that you learned something from this video.